Colleagues, it's great to be here, and I'll explain the Coke cans in a moment. I'd also like to acknowledge the panel and just introduce them briefly. We're not the most gender diverse panel, but we are the first South-North diverse panel, which is great to see. So we have Africa twice represented on this panel. Just to sort of briefly introduce the panellist, Gert on the far side here is the South African Deputy Minister of Sport, but is also here today as the chairperson of the Intergovernmental Committee for Physical Education and Sport, which is the sort of guiding hand behind the Kazan Action Plan, which is, probably the most important cohesive document that guides us all in the area. Michael is the Deputy Director of Sport in Sierra Leone, also a member of the Commonwealth Advisory Board on Sport, along with David Grevenberg and I. Maja is just the immediate past Sports Minister from Slovenia, and those of you who were in Geneva last year will well remember her. And David Grevenberg, I don't think needs too much introduction, has been a leader in the Commonwealth Games Federation, one of the leading sports federations in terms of actually making things happen in the sports and human rights world. And I was thinking this morning how far we've come from Leone when we met in a small room 3 years ago, with probably about 4 years ago, thanks Mickey, with just in one room around one table. And I was very excited when I saw that, because I thought, and picking really up on what Sharon Burrows said, I thought here is something that can be used as a language to explain to a lot of people in the world what human rights is all about. And actually to think where we are today and to have Mary in place, which is just fantastic, is amazing. I think I didn't put the Coke cans up here and bottle just for Brent, although I did pick Coke cans because Coca-Cola has been such a supporter of us. I did because one of the things that we're going to talk about today is sort of coherent policy, and one of the things I find, particularly with these countries trying to run away from their human rights obligations, which they've voluntarily signed up to, is that they like to divide the world up into things. So one of the things I just want us to remember is that the integrity of sport is not a separate can from SDGs or human rights. The SDGs are not a separate can from integrity and human rights. And human rights is not a separate can from human rights and the SDGs. It's one bottle. All right? And the bottle is built on a platform which in SDG terms is SDG Goal 16. And in terms of athletes' rights, the important one in that is democracy. The other ones are transparency and accountability, lack of corruption, no match fixing, no doping. Because if you imagine the bottle, if I chop the bottom off, it wouldn't hold much Coke. And then the SDGs sit in social, cultural, economic, social, cultural and social, economic and environmental rights, and the SDG goals as the pillars that hold this together, as what holds the bottom together. And really at the top is the well-being of the people of the world. The OECD Better Living Index and those sorts of models. And so the people on this panel are going to talk about what they've been doing in some of those areas. In the SDGs, I think you can take us through the work that UNESCO's been doing and the committee that you lead in the Kazan Action Plan. Michael's going to take us through, how joining all those silos together and the silos in government, because that's the other problem with the silo thing. The health ministry's over here, the sports ministry's over there, the education ministry's over there, and we need to join them all up to actually make this happen. It's one bottle. Maja the same is going to tell us about the Slovenian experience, and I think cover the Tbilisi Declaration on Sport and Human Rights, which is one of the many amazing developments this year in sport and human rights. And David Grevenberg probably bring it all together in terms of telling us what the Commonwealth Games Federation's done, and in this year when it's developed its own sport and human rights policy, and it's beginning to change the game. And one of the things that this work for me has really made me realise, I suppose at the start I was thinking of rights like health and education. The use of the Sustainable Development Goals brings in the thing that Mary's talking about. So sustainable cities are a huge part of what we need to worry about, because the population of the world is going to live in cities by 2050. The built environment is responsible for 50% of emissions, and kids need grounds to play on. In Tuvalu, they won't have an island to live on if we don't do anything, let alone grounds to play on. So all of these things interact. And so we're building one house with human rights, SDGs, and integrity, not three. So I think we're going to hand over to you to start. You're a rugby player, so you understand the red card, yellow card system. Well, you don't have to leave for 10 minutes if I hand up the yellow card.
Thank you so much, David. Distinguished guests, thank you so much for the opportunity to be at this forum, where we have a range of high-level delegates representing a broad range of sports stakeholders. I will, as the President of CGIPS, or Chairperson of CGIPS, address the Kazan Action Plan, but was also requested to refer to orienting sports policy towards human rights, sustainable development, and measuring impact. Now, this forum provides the sports movement, to my view, with a great opportunity to contribute to the celebrations of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As a representative of South African government, and considering the background and the history of that wonderful country of ours, I have appreciation for the importance of human rights, and I firmly believe in the significant role that sport plays in any nation's culture, health, education, economy, social upliftment, and yes, nation building. In fact, today, 29 years ago, on this day, the 13th of December, for 2 hours and 55 minutes, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk met for the first time, mapping out the road of my country that led to his freedom and the freedom of my people. Now, within CGIPS, there is also recognition of the potential of sport to serve as a vehicle for the constructive development of humankind, and as such contributing to harmonious and peaceful societies. The importance of preserving human dignity is embedded in paragraph 22 of the introduction to the Kazan Action Plan. I would like to quote that. Recognizing that it is essential to protect, respect, and fulfill the human rights of all involved in the delivery of physical education, physical activity, and sport. Now, looking at sports policies of major role players in the field of sport all over the world, including the Kazan Action Plan, the one key factor identified for the development of human beings and contributing to social development and peace building is the importance of enhancing physical activity, especially among the youth. Just a few generations ago, David, physical activity was an integral part of daily life. Unfortunately, in the name of progress, we have chipped away at it so thoroughly that physical inactivity actually seems normal nowadays. However, having said that, the economic costs are unacceptable and the human costs are unforgivable. Numerous national and international studies are painting an alarming picture of the current state of inactivity and obesity amongst the youth. Osteoporosis kicking in at the age of 9 because of inactivity. Very concerning is the increasing evidence that the roots of adult ill health and early death lie in childhood. Research indicates that for the first time in history, children have a shorter lifespan than their parents due to non-communicable diseases. It's against this background, disturbing background, that CGIPS have updated the International Charter of Physical Education, Physical Activity and Sport. We further facilitated the process of developing the Kazan Action Plan that was approved at the 6th International Conference of Ministers and Senior Officials responsible for physical education and sport, known as MINEP6, in Kazan last year. We need to move to the implementation and monitoring phases, ladies and gentlemen, so that on a continuous basis we improve on our impact. It's time that decision makers stop talking about it and really start investing in structured and organized programs that foster social cohesion and development through sport. In fact, forums like this, to my view, must result in concrete actions and build the work that we've done at MINEP6. In fact, I have here a book from my country, a study done in 11 African countries, sport and development policy in Africa. We are going to use the Kazan Action Plan to deepen this and to really do something more comprehensive in the year to come, leading up to MINEP6-7. This year, South Africa celebrates the centenary of the first democratic president, Nelson Mandela, man who demonstrated that sport can be a uniting force and a critical tool towards nation building. We experienced that in 1995 with the Rugby World Cup, again with the FIFA World Cup in 2010. Now, considering the work done by UNESCO and various resolutions adopted by the United Nations, it's heartening to note that political leaders throughout the world are becoming increasingly aware of the fundamental role that sport can play in improving the quality of life as well as the contribution to peace and social stability. Sport has proven to serve as an excellent means of communicating, particularly for the young people, of fostering reconciliation between divided communities and of alleviating even the most profound social tensions. Worldwide, there are many examples where sport was a unifying factor. Look at South Africa. We are a living example of that. Armed with the understanding of the costs and consequences of physical inactivity, it's clear that it's time for world leaders and for sports movements to really move from talk shops to action-oriented interactions. A prosperous and healthy future for countries worldwide literally depends on well-formulated sports development projects by governments and relevant role players to change the current trajectory. In this regard, the Kazan Action Plan serves as an overarching reference for fostering international convergence among policymakers in the fields of physical education, physical activity and sport. However, more importantly, the Kazan Action Plan does not only provide the policy framework for the impact of sport and physical activity in critical areas, but it also presents guidelines for the implementation of policy. In fact, the Kazan Action Plan commits UNESCO to pursue 5 action steps in cooperation with a broad range of stakeholders in sport, ranging from governmental and intergovernmental institutions to sports organizations, universities and NGOs. I was very encouraged at MINEP6, where a number of countries had expressed an intention to use the Kazan Action Plan as a guideline for their sports policies. I have no doubt that if UNESCO member countries built only one of the action plan activities into their own business plans, we will really see, Alexander, a vast improvement in the global development of sport and physical education. That in the lead up to MINEP7 in 2021, I think, if I remember correctly. Even a small project or a single action have the potential to become a catalyst for global change. The world needs to see and experience the impact of sport. Member States should really advocate the implementation of the Kazan Action Plan at regional and continental levels. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot allow governments and the private sector and NGOs to really continue to work in silos when it comes to sports development. In this regard, CEGEPS is setting a good example with its structures that provide for representatives of government as well as private consultative council members. In Kazan, the committee responsible for the development of the plan recognized the need for monitoring the implementation of the plan. The monitoring of the Kazan Action Plan will empower CEGEPS and government departments responsible for sport with more concrete information on the role of sport and of physical education in contributing to the achievement of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and also building a better world for all. Furthermore, it will assist policy development and serve as a roadmap in preparations for MINEP 7. I trust that governments of the member countries of UNESCO, together with the sporting fraternity and the private sector, will tackle the challenges of implementing and monitoring the Kazan Action Plan as a united force, not in silos. All spheres of society, in all countries, can only benefit from such effort. Through a well-structured monitoring system, we can evaluate how successful we are in achieving the deliverables outlined in the action plan, with a view of optimizing the benefits of sport and physical activity and the potential to deliver a high return on investment. As chairperson, South Africa is working closely with the CGIPs to interrogate the most practical and best way of monitoring the implementation of the Kazan Action Plan. I want to conclude. The spirit of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights compels me to conclude with the words of my President, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who last week, at the celebrations of the Declaration in our country, said, and I quote, "We should take great pride that a culture of human rights continues to take root across the globe, even in parts of the world once associated with repression. Human rights are universal. They are not relative. For as long as only some enjoy them and others don't, our task is not over." I want to echo these sentiments of my President and commit as chairperson of CGIPS, repeat my request that we as sports leaders, if we join hands in promoting human rights across the globe so that all people can enjoy the freedom that we so dearly cherish and we can leave a better, fairer world to the generations to come, we will leave a lasting legacy. This is my wish. I thank you.
Thank you, Gert. And just really to say, too, that one of the great things that did happen this year that not everyone may be aware of is that the Commonwealth Heads of Government in April actually recognised the importance of collective action by Commonwealth sports federations and businesses to protect human rights in sport. And certainly, I think it's worth remembering in what we're doing the apartheid years. You know, one of our Prime Ministers, Helen Clark, was on the field in the Waikato game that was called off, protesting. New Zealand was very much tail end Charlie in terms of doing the right thing. And rugby was tail end Charlie in terms of doing the right thing. And I hope we can change that in this effort. But I really welcome your comments. And we'll turn now to another part of the Commonwealth, Michael. And I think hopefully you're going to tell us a bit about the countries around Sierra Leone as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you all. Thank you, Center for Sports, for giving me the opportunity to be here. And the good thing about this panel is the cards are next to me, so I'm going to get I'm going to get hold of them for a while. Growing up in Sierra Leone, I was listening to my colleague from Cameroon spoke about rugby. Still in Sierra Leone, right to play and access to physical activity is still a problem. In my country, sports and school, you have to choose whether to go to school or to do sports, because they think sports is for people who are out of school. And it was a big problem for me. In fact, I was in high school when I started playing volleyball for my national team. But before I got to that level, I had to sneak to go for practice. And knowing angry African parents, when you come back home, you're gonna get a lot huge lashing, when you come home. So, but I had to choose that part because I love sports and I wanted to go to the other level. And this mindset is what we've been trying to alter back home if we want our kids, to our younger ones, to participate in sports. The access to sports facilities and safe spaces is also a major problem back home. I'll tell you that before I took up this job in 2015, we only had one boxing gym in the whole of the country. So imagine if there's only one boxing gym in Paris, and you stay in Leone, that means you have to travel every day to come to Paris for training. and that's not access at all. So we're looking at how we can guarantee that our citizens have access to sporting facilities and safe spaces. In terms of rights issues, these are problems we encountered a lot with our associations in terms of selection. When they select athletes for international representation, it's either sometimes you have to pay money for it, and the actual athletes who have the capacity to participate at that level are not given the right to actually go out there and show how best they can do portray their skills. So we've been looking at how we can address this issue. School sports was zero, and also we thought because of, as a donor-driven country, 80% of our domestic revenue goes towards wages, so the government only has 20% to give towards ministries that are not donor-driven, and that's basically nothing. Like my ministry, they give us about $1 million per year. We have 36 sporting disciplines, and when they give you this $1 million, they tell you make sure football participates in all the competitions, and football alone takes over 80% of that sum, so the other sporting disciplines basically have nothing, no access at all to participate or to develop. So in order to mitigate around that problem, we thought of two things. One, we need to review our national policy. The policy that we were using was developed in 1964, and at that time, they were black and white TVs. So we thought to meet the current trend, we needed to review to the present age so we know exactly which direction we want to go as a country and as a government. And also we thought because of the cost that is involved in infrastructure, and otherwise we thought instead of just elite sport, we should also pay attention to our traditional sports to see how we can use traditional sports to get a lot of our people involved in physical activity, because for that they don't need the infrastructure exactly for them to have access to physical exercise. And we're very much aware that lack of physical activity is a fourth or leading factor for mortality globally. So we thought that's going to be a way to bring our citizens into more active capacity. To set up a policy back home, it was really difficult because the first stage is to mobilize support and to get the political will. For me, in 4 years as a director, I've served under 6 ministers in 4 years. And at the end of the day, you have a minister who is in support of development issues. You have a minister who is just focused on participation issues. And that has been a big problem in order for us to have consistency within the ministry. So what we did was to set up a national strategy with support from the Commonwealth Secretariat, wherein we can not just involve ministers, because ministers are hired today and fired tomorrow, but we needed people who are within the government that will make sure there's continuity with these policies for over a certain period of time. So with the strategy, we end up reviewing our national policy. We had the option either to do a distinct SDP strategy or to incorporate a strategy into our existing national policy. But because our national policy was so skewed, it just has to do with participation, so we had to review all our instruments and also design a code of conduct which we outline, which outlines the behavior of our coaches for them to be professional, because we've had a lot of complaints from our athletes back home. Some secondary school girls will come to a swimming pool, they're interested to start training swimming, but probably the first day they appear at the swimming pool, this coach might want to have an intimate relationship with his athlete. So at the end of the day, that girl will go and never return. So some of these discourage a lot of girls participating in sports back home. So we've tried a lot to see how we'll address these issues, bring in legal-minded people and see how we'll have legal action taken against people who are found guilty doing things like that. And also we're currently trying to empower. In Sierra Leone, I was listening yesterday to one of the panels with the athletes unions, athletes unions, etc. In my country, that basically doesn't exist. The labor union or athletes association or women's sports commission, those are virtually dormant. And these are the pillars which we needed to empower for us to actually achieve the goals we have in our national strategy. So at the moment, we've had support from the Canadian government, we have support from few organizations in the UK, thanks to the Commonwealth Secretariat. They've helped us a lot in terms of giving us the connect for us to be able to get the support we need to move forward. The Women in Sports Commission is now up and running, but with the center now in operation, I'm pretty sure this will be a good avenue for us to link our Athletes Network, our Women's Commission with the center, so they'll be able to build their capacity in addressing some of these issues back home. As a government, we are not run like an NGO. An NGO, you have a board of directors, you have 7 members in that board, and you just need 4 people to agree on something, then you move forward. As a government, you need the minister to agree. So whether it's a good idea or not, if the minister says no, that's it. So it's really difficult from that angle as well, but we try our best to see how we'll convince our ministers to believe in the process. That's the most difficult part. In terms of the SDGs, we focus more on 1, 3, 4, 10, 11, and 16. It has to do with poverty, health, inclusiveness, inequality, and also building resilient and safer cities. We have best practices we can share with the rest of the world on how we've used sports to address some of these. One key, let me tell you one practice. When we had the Ebola that was ravaging my country a couple of years ago, contact was forbidden because of the way the Ebola was transmitted. So post-Ebola, a lot of survivors had difficulty reintegrating into communities. So we thought, okay, if we can organize sports activities, bring in these survivors for them to play alongside people who didn't contract the disease, and at the end of the day, they get tested and nobody is positive. This will build the confidence in helping these people get reintegrated into our communities. So we organize programs like that through the communities where Ebola was more serious, and then these people were able to come back without fear at all within their communities. We've also used sport to do research on health issues back home. We worked with the Medical Association and the biggest hospital in Sierra Leone. What we did was we had an agreement with the doctors that let them look amongst their patients, the ones they think if they get involved in physical activity, this will improve their health standards. So they referred about 50 to 60 patients per every 6 months, and then we put them through a schedule with our coaches and physios at the Sports Council, and then they report for medical checks with these doctors on a monthly basis. So based on those reports, we know who's improving, who's not improving, and whether the techniques we're using, they've actually made changes or improved the health status of those patients. And we noticed that about 70% of those that participated actively in the program noticed tremendous increase in their health status, and they stayed in the process. They knew that if we go away, then our health problems will resurface again, so they continue to involve in physical exercise. And they were also able to convince their colleagues that I think this is a way out for you. Come participate in sports, and then your health status will not get deteriorated. At the end of the day, looking at all this, we also thought school sports. When I took up this job, we did a research, and we found out that 80% of our elite athletes, they are not educated. So most of these athletes wanted to go overseas for training. Well, my question was, you guys can't read and write. Even if we send you to the UK for training, how are you guys going to learn anything? So to mitigate around that, we thought they were not our targets anymore. We thought we should go back to the school system and ensure that we have a more robust school system, wherein we'll ensure kids that are participating or have talents, we ensure they have scholarships so they could go through the system. Most of the guys who played soccer or other sports back home, they didn't make it to the high level, so financially they didn't make it in life. So at the end of the day, when they retire from sports at the age of 30 or 35, there's no fallback position for them. So we thought we should include life skills and ensure that our athletes, within the next 5 to 10 years, let's ensure that we have athletes who are educated, because now sport is technological, and you should have athletes who will be able to go online, read the rules, and try to upgrade their ideas about what's happening around the world. So those are some of our focus points at the moment. And before I get any problem with these yellow cards and red cards, I want to say Gamsamida. That's how we say thank you in Korean. Thank you.
Yes, Mary's terrified us all. Okay, thank you, Michael. And we might come back to some of the Indigenous sports stuff that you've talked about as well. One of the things that's interesting too, just listening to that about Ebola, was one of the things you don't think about sport and its contribution to society is what would happen in natural disaster recovery as well. We found out in New Zealand in the Christchurch earthquake that in the immediate aftermath of an earthquake, it isn't the government that helps you. It's the fabric in your community. And the three most critical things in our communities in New Zealand were the churches, the sports clubs, and the Māori maraes. And without them, we would not have been able to respond. And they get no funding for natural disaster planning. You know, but in that context, they're very, very important because they're there and they know the people on the ground. So, Maja, come to you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for this really important opportunity that I can share some of our experiences with you. But let me first start with a little story which happened when Our Excellency, the Ambassador of Switzerland, called me, the Slovenian Ambassador in Switzerland, and she said, a very, very proactive lady, and she said, Maja, something is going on in Geneva, you know. We have had here very interesting initiative, and I know that your heart beats for sport, so I'm sure that we will be on the board immediately. And I said, well tell me, what is going here about, and what everything is here? And she said, well, just say yes, and everything will be fine. And I said yes, and my government said yes, and my Prime Minister said absolutely. Why? Because we are one of, I would say, sports nations in Europe. I usually say that for every Slovenian, there's a little bit of DNA in it which talks about sports. But it doesn't need to be really, really active. But when we have our athletes or our events, sport events going on, believe me, sometimes even the whole country stops. We breathe for them. We even stop to breathe, you know, and we say, yes, this is what really, really unifies us. Why? Because sport is such a universal language, and everyone understands it. And therefore, I said immediately yes, because human rights is something what everyone has to understand, encompass, and fulfill, is something what goes really, really very much along with the universal language of sport. So therefore, thank you, Mary Robinson, for giving us this opportunity. And we usually say that we have role models in sport. Every youngster has a role model in sport, but I have a role model here. So Mary, thank you for bringing us together. And I have another role model here because I know how it is to chair and to direct very small unit of people, but at the same time, huge agenda. So, John, congratulations, and congratulations to the team. And Mary, thank you for coming here, because we are all here to help you, to support you, and definitely to work on human rights in sport and for sport. Thank you. So, about Slovenia and our jurisdiction in sport and our challenges. My first challenge was, and I put it on one of the first priorities in my sport agenda, that we change the law on sport. It was the law being on the table for 20 years, but no one tackled it, because it was, on one side, yes, challenging, but on the other side, so many things have happened that it was really a huge agenda to start to work with. And at that time we said, yes, maybe this is the right reason to open again an open dialogue with all the stakeholders in sport in Slovenia, from employers, athletes, all the institutions, all the presenters of sport and so on, and yes, we did it. And we did it in the way that really the dialogue was very open, and we've tackled some quite important issues, and one of those was, of course, human rights. And yesterday you listened to our ombudsman for sport, and I think we are one of the rarest countries here around that we can say that we have an ombudsman for sport, and actually he's working with athletes, for athletes, to protect the rights and, of course, to create also the prevention, before, not that any of the cases which should not happen, that they do not happen. So Rožle Prizel will also be a member of the advisory board on behalf of the government of Slovenia. I think that this is how we now wrap our work together, and I'm fully convinced that he will do his very good job. Another thing what was brought into the law was the accessibility for every citizen that he or she can use the sport facilities, because many of the sport facilities were built by public money, and public money means that it is here for everyone. So no one thought about that before, and we said, yes, if we are such a sporty nation, we have to work on this. So it is another right which was given to everyone practically to use these facilities, and I think that from that perspective, and David, you want to tackle also the well-being area. This is one of the steps towards sustainability of well-being of everyone within the country, of every citizen. So this is something what is much more open now, and people really enjoy the usage of that. So another area which we've tackled also through the law was the status of the athlete and also the employees within the sport. We are here as a huge team because we have a representative of the Athletes Union, we have the Ombudsman, we have the representative of diplomatic staff, and it's me here. So a little small Slovenia of 2 million inhabitants with 4 delegates here, it shows that really we are working on the dialogue and that we want to not only share but also learn how to do it better, no matter from which angle and no matter from which stakeholder's point. So dual career, free access to education for every athlete, employees' rights within the contracts under the collective agreements. This is all what is now in the law. So that's important for everyone who is entering the area to understand what is there institutionalized. Of course, on the other hand, it has to be implemented. And this is what we are still challenging with and trying to create good practices. On the other hand, we have connected some activities with the health area and with the health ministry, which is not so simple. Not in every country, I would say. These are 2 strong systems in Slovenia, education, sports system and health system, because they are both public. And, but we have created so-called health promotion centers. Health promotion centers work together on sports activities, physical activities, and on the other hand on the health prevention in the sense of diseases. We have introduced kinesiologists into the work or in the work of different institutions, and at the same time we have put in the law the prevention of injuries for young athletes, because young athletes were the most vulnerable group at that time, and we have had no prevention, no protection for them. So parents were, of course, all there to help, but at the same time, the government has to do something to prevent and to protect them when they are doing the first steps of their career. So such things have been finally wrapped also in the law, which I think is a major step forward. But being also in the capacity of the education minister, I felt very lucky because we have introduced new activities, not only in the sense of the physical sport, but also for the understanding of the values of sport, of the meaning of the fair play, of the meaning of why should kids not bullying each other, why should there has to be no harassment among them, how and in what way to understand that peer-to-peer means to help to each other and to support each other. So we've introduced the experiment in the primary schools, 45 minutes of physical activities, with the stress also on teaching and creating and learning about the values. I'm the true believer of basic values of sport. And this is why I have also initiated that together with some associations like UEFA and other associations, we are creating and trying to put also on the European Commission table so-called European model of sport. Because otherwise, if we are not stepping together, we will bring in certain areas sport to the edge. We don't need that. We should not allow that to ourselves. sport is just too positive in itself, that we should or allow ourselves to ruin all these positive values and all these positive impacts we all believe in. But if we believe in, then we have to act. So in the capacity of the minister, I really had an opportunity and really very good dialogue with all the stakeholders to whom I really thank that we have brought all these novelties on the table and that we can now implement them. But at the end of the day, what was my vision and purpose and what we were, together with my team and lots of other colleague ministers and still with the government, working on is awareness what sport can bring to each of us, protection and prevention, which goes along, of course, with the respect of human rights, basic rights, inclusiveness, maybe we have not yet talked enough about inclusiveness, integrity of sport, and definitely wrapping all this in the idea of sustainability of well-being. When we have been building one of the most, I would say, modern Nordic ski centers in the Glaciers Valley, Planica, one of the most beautiful valleys in the world, if you ask me, there was first an act of a law to protect the nature and to build infrastructure in a sustainability way, protecting everyone, even people working there. So this is how I see the big picture of sustainability on the long run. And this is how I see the big picture also of the HAPA policy, of all the organizations, ILO we heard before, about HVO and so on. So this is the big picture we all have to have responsibility to be implemented then, no matter where you work, in which capacity you are. Because responsibility means that you really act on it, not only talk about it. So there are many, of course, challenges still left, but this is the compass we have set for Slovenia, and this is why I was really glad that we got this initiative of the center and that we can work together on it and share good practices, learn from each other, build the capacity, and at the same time have constantly in mind that sustainability of well-being is sustainability of humanity.
Well, I'm definitely going to read the Slovenian sports law. Thank you, Maja. And next speaker is David Grevenberg. In Leone 4 years ago, David, I first met David, and he showed us the Commonwealth Sports Impact Model, which he had as a house built on the pillars of, which you'll probably talk about, so I won't go into that. But just to let you know that model I took home to New Zealand, and the Treasury is now using that model to develop the first wellbeing budget for the country. Adapted a little bit, David won't quite recognise it, but it really just pulled all that together, and so it's really exciting to see how some of these ideas can travel. So David, thank you, and I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, everyone. We set out probably 4 years ago now to create the Federation of Tomorrow. And that's the bold statement that I came in as chief executive. To an organization that's been running the Games since 1930, that was formerly called the Empire Games, that then migrated to the Commonwealth Empire Games, and now is the Commonwealth Games. So in 10 years, I'm not sure what we'll be called, but we'll see where we get to. We set out a new vision for the organization, and talking to what David has said, was built on going beyond just the games, that a movement that focused on games and hosting games, but to a movement that focused on building peaceful, sustainable, and prosperous communities. How? Through the power and inspiration of our athletes to drive the impact and ambition of all Commonwealth citizens through sport. Communities and citizens, athletes and sport. quite evangelistic. And in many cases, it was a call to action. Where we have gotten to and where we have traveled from, it's quite, I would say we've come a long way in a short time, which has felt like a lifetime. We identified, in many respects, that we are an organization that needs to conform and have the agility to conform, and I include compliance in our ability to conform, and we need to perform. We need to conform to standards of accountability, and we also need to conform to changing times, changing perspectives, and a better connected and better informed world. At the same time, we need to have a strategy. We need to perform to a strategy. And that's very future-focused. We need to have policies that help us achieve that, the spokes of the wheel. And that's also very future-focused. But if we don't deal with our past and our present, in terms of conforming with standards, with a degree of urgency, we will never be able to perform at the highest level and actually realize our full potential as a movement. And that is basically the approach that we have taken. So with our far-reaching vision and strategy, we established 5 strategic priority areas. And I'll talk to where human rights fits into them, all of them. It's not just conforming to human rights, it's performing human rights. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. Our first action area was about innovation and inspiring people through our games. So an inspirational and innovative games concept. In order to create people's proudest moments, you have to value people. And the easiest way to do that is starting to look at the delivery of the games. Now, we've piecemealed things and have had a very reactive model to looking at the local context of an organizing committee, and we've responded more or less effectively to local context. But we didn't have, within our host city contract, the teeth, the language that was really required to create a framework that could actually help us conform and perform, that actually looked at the value chain of a major sporting event and it gave us the ability to embed human rights at every single level. I'm happy to say that for Birmingham 2022, with a plethora of lessons learned from many of you, we have been able to embed for the very first time in our host city contract a standard that we will both conform and perform to, that identifies and looks at risks, salient and systemic risks, contextually, globally, within our unique and distinct Commonwealth, and use the games and the opportunity, because the games are an opportunity based on time. It's a time-limited opportunity for the city, for the athletes. It's not the panacea. It's not going to correct all the evils of the world, but it will and can shift a dial. But it requires a standard to be committed to. So that's a big pillar for our games. And we have not taken the men and women from Del Monte approach of occasionally coming to inspect the fruit. We are taking an embedded approach. I stole that from Boris Johnson, describing the Olympic or the IOC and IPC coordination commissions. He felt that we were the men and women from Del Monte that occasionally came and inspected the fruit. It's taking a different approach to actually embedding our position in the organizing committee and having some risk and responsibility taken forward by us, which is important. So we are taking on some risk and responsibility and not just giving it strictly over to the organizing committee. The second strategic priority is governance and management. We have had to fundamentally change our governance and management. The language that we use, the policies that we have set, the training that we receive on safeguarding, I'll wrap up. All of those aspects have been quite important. Partnerships. We have established partnerships with public-private third sector. The Commonwealth Secretariat as an intergovernmental organization, working with them to change and influence policy, to have governments not only regulate our members and regulate sport, but enable our members to do the right thing. Our brand, which is our fourth pillar, has to champion a movement that is dedicated to the service of others. Sport is at the service of others. Our games are at the service of others. That language is absolutely critical in how we present our personality. And then finally, and this is an area that we're developing right now in a movement-wide development program, which is a commitment to collective impact. Collective impact. Working with athletes to chase causes. My question yesterday about athlete activism. It's here. It's here to stay. How do we manage it effectively, constructively, so that we help athletes make the world a better place? They are major actors in that service to society. As a federation, these are the policies and the conformance elements, but also the way that we will assess our performance in the future. We're going beyond philanthropy and our relationship with human rights as a philanthropic or corporate social responsibility initiative, and actually embedding it as a fundamental part of our business success model. We are in the business of, and which will help us be more sustainable, create more peace, and ultimately prosper. There's an urgency to this work, though, and I think that's the importance. Every moment we waste, someone could get harmed, and an opportunity could be missed. And so I guess if anyone's interested with more in the detail of these areas, I'm happy, as always, to share some of the initiatives we've thought through and some of those we're thinking through. But I just want to appeal to all of you is to embrace the work of the center. We feel that the center is going to be a critical friend, but also a very helpful and supportive friend. And with Mary and Mary, I'd just like to thank you for all your support and look forward to the Commonwealth Games Federation's continued journey towards a more fair and free world. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the Commonwealth Games Federation for their leadership amongst sporting federations. I just briefly want to ask Maja to cover the Tbilisi Declaration, and then I'll immediately go to questions if people are formulating them.
Thank you, David. The declaration was already mentioned yesterday, but I would really like to expose this document because it actually encompasses everything what we are working here on, also through the center. And just to state the first part of the declaration, it says that we are promoting common standards in the field of human rights and monitoring and supporting the implementation. What could be said more clearly and more directly what we are here for. And the declaration really encompasses everything what we have to work on, and as David has right now exposed from the Commonwealth view, or us from the European model of sport, or the other continents from their own perspective. It's here also being connected with what is going on in the health and well-being area, because we have to protect also our health and I would say sustainability in the way as we explained before. And it's therefore stressing the role and the program of the World Health Organization. This is Global Action Plan on Physical Activity 2018-2030. It's also exposing the United Nations 2030 agenda, talking not only about the human rights, but also about the education, the activities within it. So everything is here, and ministers have supported that. And also European Council and European Commission are very well aware of that, what is going on. So former ministers, existing ministers, we will all spread the word around this declaration, because it means a lot. It's practically a tool for all of us to work on it, each of us from its own jurisdiction and own capacity, but it is something what I think should be implemented. And we all know that implementations not only take time, but also high dedication. But aren't we here to do so? Thank you.
So let me just look for questions in the audience. Thank you. So we've got 1, 2, 3. Okay. So we've got 3 questions, and also just I'll come back to Michael right at the end on Indigenous sport. Minky.
Thank you all for a terrific discussion and world tour. I'd like to ask, I'd like to thank you all for your leadership. The movement that we are all involved in accelerating really happens only with people and actual leaders who are prepared to stand up. And it's wonderful to see you in Tbilisi. But I wanted to ask David Grevenberg a question, and the federations have a role in at the top of the food chain. You called it standard setting, but I wanted to ask what we can do to all be on the same page about the UN guiding principles, and for all the federations. I think we heard from Federico yesterday that FIFA has made rather important progress, even as they tried to deal with breaking crises. What is your guidance as someone who's leading a federation for how we can deal with the entire federation ecosystem? That would be the International Olympic Committee with its 206 national Olympic committees, all the IFs, which have a tremendous gender gap, three of hundreds headed by women. So what's your guidance as the head of a federation about how we can get the rest of the federation community on board?
I think starts with some common language. And we have to demystify and educate sport that it's not as big and scary to embrace this movement as it may appear to be. And I really do think that there's a level of ignorance and fear in many federations because it is against hierarchical cultures. We had an amazing discussion in June about what is our culture and how is it transformed through Transformation 2022. The Commonwealth Games Federation has been a very hierarchical culture, as are many federations. We talk about cascading from the mothership and the executive board and governing bodies being, yet they are one entity within many entities. They're one player that has one role amongst many roles. And I think it is becoming more organic in terms of our language, but also much more clear in terms of the culture that we're trying to create. And that is a bit academic in description, but I do think it starts with language. It starts with breaking down strictly hierarchical culture and having a much more, I think we've moved to a clan-based culture where we have different factions now, and we're moving towards what's called an adhocracy culture with innovators, risk takers, and and support. And I think that's where I think sport needs to start going. And I think that if we can start to show both the responsibilities that sport has, that you can't simply say that you want autonomy but not accountability. And I think it needs to be supported by governments and supported by NGOs and so forth, the enabling role that they can play, but also the importance of the regulatory role. But I also think that there is, I would say, an important show of actually how this adds value in terms of your overall value chain as well. And actually looking at your value chains and saying, these are the must-dos to comply, and these are all the opportunities we have to shift the dial and prioritize them and go after them. And I think that just is going to take time in terms of case studies. But there's value to be leveraged that can lead to profitability and impact and continued growth for sport if we remodel our thinking around this. And I think it's about actually remodeling that thinking and transforming the culture of sport from hierarchy to adhocracy, if you will. Great.
Yeah, hello, thank you. My name is Martin Kainz. I'm from the Vienna Institute for International Dialogue and Cooperation, and I also have a brief question to David Gravenberg. David, you mentioned that you implemented a standard for the first time into the host city contract for Birmingham 2022. I'm intrigued by that. So you partly answered it just now through the global value chain and so on, but you said the standard also has a global reach. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? So how did you get to this standard and what's in there? Thank you.
Had a lot of support from many actors in this room that contributed to setting higher standards related to compliance with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and making that as an obligation within the host city contract, which again looks right to that value chain proposition. But it also, the protection, the respect, protect piece is critical, and the promote and leveraging of more opportunities is a bonus. But you must, in the first instance, prioritize the respect and protection of people in the first instance and that delivery. If we're truly trying to create people's proudest moments, this plays strongly into that role. And there's numerous things contextually in terms of inclusivity and champion broader issues that you can attach to a games. But it's very contextual, both time and place.
Okay, I'm being given the red card, I'm afraid.
Yeah, John.
I know there's 3 more questions. I'm sure the panel will hang around a little